All right, so in the past year or so, I've had several people ask me basically how rental prices continue to rise, because people are upset right now. People are angry because it costs so much to put a roof over their family's head. And people are angry because if they're young, they're like 23 years old, they might be making like 15 bucks an hour, and they still got to live with their parents because they actually can't rent an apartment and make their car payment and food and bills and all that kind of stuff. So people are upset about this, and I want to explain a little bit about the mechanics of the supply and demand. And so when people ask me how rents rise, they'll usually say something like this. They'll say like, okay, so there's like one landlord put the house out there at like 2,000 and then that gets rented. And so then the next one to put a house out there does it at 2,050 and then somebody snatches that up. So then the next one is at 2,100. And the answer is like, yes, except no. And I'm going to illustrate this real quick. Let's imagine that we have a small city somewhere in the United States, and there are exactly 100,000 households in this city that rent. So you've got exactly 100,000 renting households. And let's say that you have exactly 101,000 rental units between all the single family and all the apartments, okay? So you've got 100,000 households, you've got 101,000 rental units. That would mean that you have exactly 1,000 vacant units all the time. All the time. This month, next month, the month after that, there's 1,000 of them just sitting empty. And that means that if somebody moves out of your rental unit and you need to get that thing rented, you're competing against 1,000 other vacant units. That means you're going to have to compete on price. You're going to have to compete on quality. You're going to have to compete on amenities. If somebody comes along and they say, hey, I'll give you $100 less than what you're asking, and also I have 7 dogs, you're going to have to say yes. So in that situation, the renters have all the power, the landlords do not, and the landlords are going to have to chase each other down on price, but only because they're not getting phone calls, they're not getting showings, they're not getting rental applications. So the mechanics are not there for prices to move up, they're there for prices to move down. Now let's imagine the same city, 100,000 households that rent, but there's exactly 99,000 rental units between the single family and the apartments. In that situation, you have 1,000 homeless families all the time. These families are going to be living with their mom and dad. They're going to be crashing on somebody's couch. They're going to be staying in a motel. They're going to be living in a car or a van. And actually right now in our area, that's kind of what things are like. There's a lot of desperate families that really can't afford housing, and they do live in motels, and they do live with their parents, and they do live in cars. And it's kind of a sad deal. But in that situation, if you're a landlord, you don't have to take dogs, you don't have to take cats. If you have a place with stained up carpets and you want $2,100 for a 3-bed, 2-bath, and it's not that nice, you can say no dogs, no cats. You're going to get $2,100 for that thing because there's 1,000 families out there that need a place to live. And so we're talking about a 1% difference. We're talking 100,000 against 101,000 or 100,000 against 99,000. And it's a dramatically different world for the landlords and the renters based on just a 1% difference in supply and demand. And so when you think about the mechanics here, it's not that landlords put out places and they're just like nickeling and diming and moving things up a little bit. It's impossible to do that if there isn't sufficient demand to eat up a sequence of rising ask prices. But if it's there, prices can rise quite quickly and they can stay sustained, and basically landlords have all the power. I put up a place, it was a single family place for a family a few years back, and this was a client of mine, and I was going to help them rent it out in exchange for a fee. And I got like 50 or 60 phone calls. People were friending me on Facebook, finding me and friending me on Facebook, and then DMing me and saying like, look, I'm a bartender, I'm a hairdresser, I really have the money, I have a 5-year-old daughter, I'm desperate, I desperately need housing. It was sad. I mean, dozens and dozens of people that I was having to turn away. And we ended up renting the place out to a girl who wired in the deposit and 6 months of rent and just jumped in front of everybody by prepaying all that rent and the deposit and wiring the money in like 9 o'clock the following morning. And that's who we took, because the landlord had all the power, because 50 or 60 people are looking for a rental and there's only a few rentals out there. And so if you think through the mechanics a little bit, it makes it clear that this is not something that happens just because landlords nickel and dime people. In a situation where there isn't sufficient demand, they don't even have the power to do that. But if you think through the mechanics a little bit, it makes it clear.